Joining me right now here in studio, Democratic Congressman from California, Sara. She sits on the House Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees. Let's get into what Molly was talking about right there. We have the president who said, look, we're going to build this pier. OK. And yet there are many who are criticizing and say, why not do as Molly was suggesting, and that is use the truck convoys. Let's get aid into that much more quickly. Use some pressure, use your leverage on Benjamin Netanyahu to get that done. What are your thoughts on all that?
Look, I think the ability to get as much aid in as quickly as possible is important. And all of the various levers we have to do that should be done because we know the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. Dire. Yes. Now, there is existing U.S. law that says that actually our allies, anyone we're working with, has to allow our humanitarian assistance in. And so I absolutely think that's right. We need to be doing more to make sure Israel lets more aid in. But at the end of the day, the only way to really make sure we are addressing these famine-like conditions is to get a permanent and immediate ceasefire, for Hamas to release the hostages, for Bibi Netanyahu to stop his indiscriminate bombing campaign that we know is not actually militarily doing what it needs to do. There is no military way to defeat Hamas. There just isn't.
As we are watching the president, who's now disembarked from Air Force One, he's being greeted there on the tarmac in Atlanta. And we're going to keep a listen and see if he takes any reporter questions, in which case we may interrupt our conversation and then continue on the other side. But this particular port that the president referenced during the State of the Union speech, it's going to take 2 months and 1,000 troops, allegedly, to get this thing operational. Why now? And does it suggest anything like this is going to be needed and going on, this war, for quite some time?
Look, I think it took a long time to get agreements by all of the countries necessary to get the sea corridor open. It's not just a unilateral thing. It's a work of many countries together, and those negotiations always take some time. And I think it's also a recognition of just how bad the humanitarian situation inside of Gaza has gotten, where even when the fighting stops, we will need to flood in humanitarian assistance. But at the end of the day, there's getting assistance into Gaza, and then there's getting it distributed within Gaza. And we need to be working to make sure on both of those things that we are doing everything we can, including, making sure that Israel is allowing as much humanitarian assistance in as possible.
And this is something you've been really focusing on. I want to tell our viewers that you joined several other Democrats in co-signing a letter to President Biden this week, in which you warned about Israel's impending Rafah invasion, where 1.5 million people are seeking refuge. You write it likely violates Biden's new memorandum ensuring military operations supported by U.S. tax dollars don't violate American or international humanitarian law. So what do you hope the president's next move is on behalf of having received that letter and going through it?
I'm very concerned about the prospect of a Rafah invasion by the IDF. I think that it would be catastrophic, especially because we know so many Gazans are there now, having went there to seek shelter. So I know that President Biden has been addressing this directly with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I support the Biden administration's efforts to make sure they're doing everything they can to get to a ceasefire deal. But we need an immediate and permanent ceasefire right now. We need Hamas to release the hostages, and we need this indiscriminate bombing campaign to end.
Okay. Just want to let everyone know that my producer in the booth said that the president did not stop to speak with reporters, so we will continue on. He is certainly hitting the campaign trail. That's part of the reason he's there in Atlanta right now. After that fiery State of the Union speech that he gave on Thursday. He and Donald Trump are both campaigning in Georgia right now. Talk about the split screen that's out there as a result of this fiery campaign speech. Did it change the trajectory of things for President Biden right now?
You know, I think the expectations going into the State of the Union were very high, and I think he exceeded it. You know, I was in the room. The energy was amazing.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yes, it was amazing. And I think he really drew out the contrast of what we're talking about, whether or not we want to look towards the future and build on the progress we've made, whether or not we want to protect our democracy and continue trying to live up to the ideals of our country, or whether we want to go back to these old ideas of xenophobia and racism and trying to take our country backwards. And And so I'm excited for the American people to get to see President Biden on the campaign trail, get to see what I get to see behind the scenes all the time about his energy, about how he handles himself in these really difficult circumstances. And I think as it becomes clearer and clearer that these are our two choices, the stakes of this election will become clearer, too.
Yeah, and apparently about 18% more Americans watched this year's State of the Union over last year's State of the Union, so even more Americans were tuning in for this one. So in the Republican response to the State of the Union, you had the junior freshman, in fact, senator from Alabama, Katie Brin, really lambasting President Biden on a wide range of issues, what she called the kitchen table issues, things that she thinks Americans are concerned about, immigration, the economy and the like. Is President Biden meeting Americans on those issues? Is congressional gridlock hurting his ability to campaign on those issues?
You know, I respect Senator Britt a lot, as some of the youngest women in Congress. I didn't know I was getting ready to watch a Lifetime movie when I was watching the response. But look, I don't know what kitchen table she's sitting at. The ones I'm at, people are really concerned about the cost of living. They're concerned about their rights for reproductive health care. And that's exactly what President Biden is talking about. You know, he released new proposals for how to address the cost of housing. He has prioritized making sure we're trying to do more to address the child care crisis in this country. That's what I'm hearing about around the kitchen table. And I think the American people, and particularly the ones who sit around the kitchen table, really want a positive, forward-looking vision, not this doom and gloom and fear-mongering that we're seeing from the other side.
Okay. I'm so glad you made time to stop in here today. My friend, Sara Jacobs, Congresswoman from California, thank you so much.